Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for logging in tonight for a live Q&A with director and SCA alumnus Aaron Schneider, discussing his new Apple original film, Greyhound, which is now available on Apple TV+, from a screenplay by Tom Hanks. Aaron saw his first feature, Get Low, draw widespread praise when it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. Get Low also earned Schneider the Independent Spirit Award for Best First Feature. His first short film, Two Soldiers, won an Academy Award for Best Live Action Short Film. So let's welcome up Aaron. And I want to just quickly say that if you have questions for us during the webinar, just go ahead and send them in the Q&A box that we have at the bottom of the Zoom webinar page. And when we open it up, if you want to, we'll invite you over to actually ask your question on camera. So just be prepared that if you ask a question, we may ask you to join us and turn your video on. So tell us a little bit about where this whole thing started. Obviously, it's unique to see a film that has a screenplay by Tom Hanks, and I'm curious how that screenplay wound up in your hands.
Yeah, well, I got the script from my agent. As agents do, sharing material when they see something that they think fits your interests. And the first thing I noticed was that it was written by Tom. It sort of had me at Tom Hanks in World War II, but then I saw that he'd written it. And, a long time ago, I had made a short film when I wanted to shift from cinematography to directing. I'd taken my life savings and, put it into a film that was hopefully going to steer my career in a new direction. And it was a big turning point in my career, which I think probably students will appreciate. Everyone's out there, kind of understands implicitly you have to introduce yourself somehow. And for me, it came a little later in my career after I'd established myself as a cinematographer, and I made this short film. And that was the beginning of my transition. And it was a kind of a nerve-wracking scenario, not just because I put my life savings into it or was kind of leaving a little of my past behind, but because it was new, creatively and artistically. It was a big challenge, a big endeavor. So when I saw Tom Hanks' name on the script, it suddenly occurred to me, everybody out there, even the big movie stars, sit at home dreaming about different ideas and things that are new to them and challenging to them. And although Tom had written in the past, it's not like he's a first-time writer, I got the sense somehow that this was unique, that this was special. And sure enough, I found out that it was something he was working on in the background for quite a long time. And I read it, and it spoke to me. It's a very unusual read, as you can imagine. You start reading the script and you're confronted with all this technical jargon. I think I had to stop about 4 or 5 pages in and really think about what he was trying to do. And then I started over and started looking underneath the words which is where, for anyone who's seen the film, is where it really lives. And then I got engaged and I got excited. And then I sent a really effusive email to my agent. And as agents are apt to do, he was inspired to send it up the chain, and it ended up, as I'm told, it ended up getting read to Tom over the phone, my email.
Oh, wow.
And I think he heard my enthusiasm, and he said, well, I'd like to sit down with him. And we did. And I spent a couple, 3 hours with Tom at Playtone, his production company that he runs with his partner, Gary Getzman. And if anyone who doesn't know, they have a long history of World War II production with Band of Brothers in the Pacific. And of course, those miniseries were born from Saving Private Ryan. Mm-hmm. And both Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg executive produced these series. And Playtone became the sort of the guardian of all things World War II in terms of storytelling. And so that was exciting. And I was in the room with Tom with all the Emmys around the room that they'd won for Band of Brothers. And we just talked about filmmaking and filmmakers. And he does great imitations of all the filmmakers he's worked with. So it's a lot of fun. And we talked about some of the cinematographers that I'd come up admiring that he'd gotten a chance to work with, like Gordon Willis, who photographed The Godfather, and Conrad Hall, who was one of my mentors out of USC Film School, who photographed American Beauty and Road to Perdition and Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. So, and it turns out that we had very similar tastes, and we hit it off. And I came back in and met his partner, Gary, and before you know it, we were making a movie together.
So first of all, I want to know if Tom has now added an impression of you to that catalog, and if so, if it's good.
An impression of me? You mean like, do I get my?
Well, he's been impersonating his. You just said that he's been doing great.
I don't know. I'll have to ask him.
The film. I mean, you are stepping into a very rich genre, and as you say, Playtone has had so many great entries into it. I'm curious to know a little bit about the sort of overall tone that they have. It's the film has this really beautiful classic Hollywood cinema feel to it, but obviously with the resources of modern production. So I'm curious a little bit about what it's like to enter into production with a company that has really done great work in this genre before. What sort of pressure is there? What kind of aesthetics do you talk about? Talk about a little bit about the tone and the style.
Well, I think they hired me to direct the film, so I took authorship over the way we were going to make the movie myself. But you're certainly influenced by everything that's come before it, and I don't think they were overtly interested in redoing what they've done before or redoing. Of course, they wanted in spirit. They wanted it to be an extension of their past works in spirit, in terms of the way they're celebrating different aspects of World War II and the heroics of World War II. But very smartly, it's every script, every movie requires its own visual language and its own foundations and its own research, and it's got its own quirks, and so the style and the photography evolved out of the script. Hollywood has a tendency to want to classify every movie into this meets that. It's Kill Bill meets the Godfather, and I've never really subscribed to that myself. It's that methodology's out there so that the people in the business that don't have it takes a filmmaker to read a script and picture a movie, a finished movie. And for everyone else out there that doesn't read scripts that way, they need a nudge. They need a framework to set it in. So, and that's always been kind of hard for me, because when I read a script, whether it's to shoot it or to direct it, I'm not really thinking this is going to be Saving Private Ryan meets Kill Bill Volume 2. I'm thinking about the fact that it's a very intense character study. It's about following one guy around through this journey and getting to know him visually, and that translates to a camera that could move as quickly as he does and be present in the moment with him, which then inspired the handheld camera, right? Meanwhile, someone might say, hey, that's Saving Private Ryan, handheld camera work. And it's like, well, no, it's actually Greyhound. It's the way we brought a large format camera up into the character's face and made sure we were nimble enough to tell that story, right? That's going on underneath all these battles inside Krause's head. And the language just sort of evolves from there. But on the production side, of course, Playtone was, they're old pros. So the production was very smooth. And that was a big help.
So when you say large format, was this intended for like IMAX size screens?
Well, when I say large format, I mean large format camera. The sensor was a 8K sensor. We used Panavision's DXL, which is a converted red camera with a 8K sensor. And let's see if I can describe it for you. for anyone who's moved from 16 millimeter to 35, or 35 to 70 to 65, or shot a regular area Alexa versus a large format Alexa, the language of lenses transposes about by a factor of about 2. So if I shot with a regular Alexa with a 20 millimeter lens, and then I put a large format camera in the same spot on my shoulder, I can use a 40 millimeter lens now instead of a 20, and I'll see the same thing because of the way the optics work and how large the sensor is. So now when you think about standing inside a pilot house, right, when you're jammed into, of a destroyer, you're jammed into a corner, and, whereas with a regular Alexa, for example, you'd throw on a big wide 18 millimeter and you'd get that sort of wide angle lens fisheye view, right?
Yeah.
If I put a large format camera on my shoulder and put a 35 on or thereabouts, I see the same thing, but I'm using the optics of a 35 millimeter lens, which doesn't distort as much. It doesn't give you that sense of looking through a door peephole. You know what I mean? That distortion you get with a wider focal length, which means now in a movie where the camera is all about getting up into the character's face and being right there with him. From a technical standpoint, now I can do that with longer focal lengths, 40s instead of 20s, which means I'm not anyone who's like I tell you what, every one of you students at home, if you lean towards your web camera, look what it does to my nose and my chin, right? It's not very flattering, all right? And as I lean away, it flattens out and I'm not as distorted, right? And that's because the lens on your laptop is a wide angle lens. Now imagine if you could get the same image you're seeing of me right now with a longer focal length and still see the same thing, so that when I lean forward, my nose isn't growing. So it's a way of getting close to an actor without kind of ending up with the distortion that you get.
And that of course must give you great flexibility when you're shooting with so many people in a potentially quite tight claustrophobic set.
Right.
I was actually thinking about how tight the script was, because the film is, really it's about 85 minutes plus credits, right? And, something of this scale almost never seems to come in at under 2.5 hours. So I'm curious to know if that started with the script, or if you guys just really wanted to intensify the sort of experience of being on that boat with touches here and there that expand that world, but really keep it tight to the experience the men were having on that ship.
Yeah, what drove the visual language was the point of view that was written into the script. We were going to experience, Tom was our conduit into the story. He was the human way in to what we were, the dilemmas, tactical, moral, whatever. So the whole language of the film kind of grew out of the need to always put the audience in the same point of view as the character who was going to be our way in. And that meant following Krauss around, and that meant sticking to his point of view of events. And if structurally, if we wanted him, we didn't get any information from down below in the ship unless Krauss inspired it. We wouldn't have cut down to a parallel scene down in the CIC, what they call the Combat Information Center, to see Stephen Graham down there, unless Krauss went over and called him. So that no matter what, and if you're going to see a U-boat go by the ship, it's going to be him taking us out and his experience of that happening. And so the point of view was always moving, the filmmaker's point of view was always kind of moving around. He was the center of this universe, and the camera just kind of followed him around and tried to tell his story through his eyes.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about, particularly in the scenes where the German boat commander is taunting them over the radio, is that we never actually see the antagonists, and that makes the taunting that much sort of creepier.
Right.
Do you know if Tom had ever sort of debated whether or not to have moments with the German soldiers?
No, never. The book itself, if you, it's based on the book The Good Shepherd by C.S. Forrester, and the book itself is about the internal angst and dilemmas and insecurities and fears of a commander, and the burden of having all that going on inside. For any of you, the students out there who, you know, put together their first directing project, right? And you got to go be a leader, and you're laying in bed at night with the wheels turning about what you're going to do the next day. And then even when you get to the set, you know, you have to sort of be the center of attention and the center of activity. And you've got all these thoughts moving around in your head, but you also have a job to do. And so you're back and forth between the job at hand and the battles going on in your own, in the case of a film, going on in your own creative mind.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of a captain, going on in the mind of a man who's never done this before and who has so many lives at stake, based, you know, his decisions save or waste lives. And that's the way the book was structured. So it's not a story about, you know, U.S. captains versus U-boats. It's more man versus himself. So the U-boats are meant to be what they are, an external threat that he has to confront and deal with. And there was never any intention to turn it into anybody's story. Or and you'll notice even the crew becomes kind of a collective, right? It's a collective bunch of people that represent a body that he's responsible for, that keeps the machine going, as opposed to individual characters with some kind of story to tell.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because I was thinking about that also, that besides Stephen Graham,
Right.
Really Cleveland, the mess cook, is really the only other character. I mean, there's you know, obviously the individual soldiers have moments, but it is really like him and then everyone else. And I'm curious about just a little bit about how you pulled out those two other characters who do serve, you know, very specific functions in the story.
Right.
But you differentiate themselves from the rest of the crew.
Well, in any good screenplay, you know, the supporting characters aren't there to tell their own story. They're there to help tell your hero's story. Now, of course, the richer those characters are, the more engaging they are. And there are subplots in screenplays and stories, and sometimes it's ensemble, sometimes it's a story more focused on a singular hero. But in this case, it was so much of an intimate character study that those characters you're talking about that do pop out a little bit, the Clevelands or the Charlie Coles, played by Stephen Graham, they're there. You know, you might recall structurally, Stephen Graham is there to back him up and to be a sounding board, to be a confidant that has the ability to have a different kind of conversation with the captain than anybody else can. Someone that he trusts, that he pulls aside and maybe shows a little bit more vulnerability to, that he knows he can trust that vulnerability with his XO, as opposed to the men eavesdropping, you know. And now we're back to that whole metaphor I was talking about when it comes to all the students out there directing, that sense of, I can't let on that I'm not sure I know the answer to everything, because everyone expects me to. And it's nice to have someone that you can have an honest conversation with about your own question marks in your own head. And that's who Charlie is. And that opens up a dialogue that the film needs to express that part of Krause's story. Cleveland is there in the background. He's an invented character that Tom put into the film, not just for narrative purposes, but also to include African-American contribution to the war effort. In that period, African-Americans were limited to mess duty on a Navy destroyer. But when the battles broke out, they were, for anyone who's seen the film knows now, they were right alongside everyone else, risking their lives. And number one, Tom wanted to portray that, to give us a complete picture, a diverse picture of everyone who served, but also from a narrative standpoint, so that there was enough of a connection between two men on a personal level that when, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it, for those who haven't seen the film yet, it's about making the sense of loss a personal experience for this character. But beyond that, beyond those things, the screenwriter, in this case Tom, wants to evoke along the way, they're there to service the story. And you only go as deep as you need to. From the very start, as a screenwriter, Tom wanted this to be, he called it the perfect 90-minute procedural drama. It's like a barn burner, in and out.
Yeah.
And the idea here, this isn't Saving Private Ryan. This isn't dying, this isn't about soliloquies given on the battlefield as soldiers die, or pulling out pictures, right? And talking about your family back home. And Tom wanted to celebrate this part, the contribution of these men, by just putting you right in the middle of it with them, and showing you what they had to do, what their jobs were, and the complexity of it, and the commitment, and in many cases the talent it took to win these battles, and just exhaust you in the same way that they are, so that you could come away with an experience similar to theirs as a audience member, and come away with some appreciation for what they did, as opposed to it being a classical narrative. I remember the last time you were on campus, I think was for our screening of Get Low. At least the last time you and I have had a conversation about your film. Right.
And this is such a different, kind of production. And I'm curious a little bit about what that transition is like for you.
Right.
To have all of these these things that aren't really there, right? Obviously the actors are, but the full scale naval battle isn't.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was a 35-day shoot. After 35 days of production, we came home with everything Tom was looking at, right? All these shots of everyone looking out at what was happening. But of course, none of what was happening existed yet, because a big portion of the film, close to half of it, is visual effects. It's a story that has to be told with digital effects, because these ships don't sail anymore. That was a challenge, because it meant that you as a director had to have the movie in your head. If you didn't have an answer for everything, if you didn't know where every ship was and how fast every ship was going by, you couldn't tell. I've described this for any of you out there who are familiar with the way they shoot The Mandalorian, in that virtual LED environment where there'll be a little piece of a real set in the middle of a stage, right? And the sand on the stage blends in with a big high definition LED background, where all the sets, whether it be the extended desert or houses or villages or spaceships, are projected live, so that when you look through the camera, you're essentially looking at a live visual effect shot. You've got your foreground plate, which is the actor and the sand, and then you've got a live version of the visual effect already comped in, which is the digital extension, plus whatever else is going on back there. And so the best way to describe Greyhound is imagine The Mandalorian without having anything in the screen, right? Like, there's a shot where the captain goes out one side of the ship and watches, make sure he clears a big tanker, and then he walks through in one shot and tells the guy to, you know, right full rudder, and he walks out the other side, and then he skims by a second tanker because he's threading the needle, and the camera operator comes out and is virtually panning by with that invisible ship until it meets Tom, who's pretending that ship's going by, and then turning back into the camera and continuing on. So on something like The Mandalorian, you'd have all that stuff live, and a camera operator could frame it, and an actor could watch it in the screen. And in the case of Greyhound, you know, we were relatively lower budget production, or much lower budget production. And so we all had to imagine what filling out the rest of the film would be, or what we were going to cut to when, you know, when Tom pulled his binoculars up, right? And then you have the complexity of saying, okay, well, a ship going by, you know, you figure it's easy. Oh, all he's got to do is pretend he's watching it go by. Well, not so much. It's a little more complicated, because if the ship's going by closer to the ship, you know, 1,000 yards out at 20 knots, that's going to be a slower pan, isn't it, through the binoculars, or a faster pan. And if there's a ship going by on the horizon out there, it might not look like he's panning his binoculars at all, because it's further away and there's less of a parallax, right? And so now it becomes three-dimensional chess. So at the beginning of every scene, unlike a regular movie set where all the elements are there and you just shoot them, we had to come up with the means of setting up eye lines and little LED lights, and here's the first mark, and here's the second, and here's the third. And I'm going to get on the microphone and describe the drive-by with 1, 2, 3. And it's on 2 is where you see the explosion, and on 3 is where you call the rudder command. And trust me, when we get down the line, it's all going to marry up and make sense. And to the degree that Tom can understand that in his mind's eye as an actor, he can create a performance. Doesn't do any good for me to cut to the stuff that's happening and have it be exciting if Tom doesn't have an inherent understanding of what he's watching and what the pertinent beats of performance are, right? There's a scene about halfway through the movie where he's battling out with a U-boat on the surface who's battling it out with yet another ship on the surface. And he's waiting for the U-boat to clear the other ship so he can fire at it. And as he's watching, you know, trying to egg the ship on to get out of the way so he can fire at it, one of those binoculars comes down, and we cut and we realize the U-boat swinging their own cannon around to shoot at Greyhound. Mm. And so you can imagine all you students out there in the editing room, it's like, wow, I need the shot. I need the version of his close-up where he's watching the battle. Then I need him to root for the ship to get out of the way. You know, come on, clear, clear, clear. And then I've got to have him come up and go, holy shit, I'm going to get shot at. Boom, right? So those are 3 pieces of film you need before you can, you know, 4 months later, create the shots that he's looking at, marry them up, and tell the story. So it was a very complex job, but it was fun. And you're right, very different than Get Low. But I've always been a little bit of a tech geek. And my tastes have always been really varied. Like I remember they used to ask me in interviews after Get Low what my fantasy job was. And I said, I would love it if Pixar called me up and invited me to make a Pixar movie the way they did Brad Bird. Mm. I just love a great story, and the tech, and the, you know, and as a cinematographer, it's fun to use the technology to tell the story. You know, your first motivation is this a cool story to tell? And then your next motivation is how cool are the tools, right? And in Get Low, it was just the good old-fashioned tools of cinematography, camera, lens, light, composition, which is where I started. And then the tools, there were more toys on Greyhound, you know, rocking sets and you know, and visual effects, composites, and spray and wind to create a texture on the set that would then blend with the weather. That stuff's fun too. But at the end of the day, it's all about, do you think it's a cool enough story to tell?
You've directed some pretty legendary actors, and I'm curious how any of that might change when the actor is also the screenwriter.
Oh, yeah.
What was that experience like?
Well, Tom has always, Tom has a history of producing, writing, and directing and acting. And so he's a pro. He knows how to do each job, and he knows where his responsibilities start and stop as a producer. He knows where they stop and start as a writer. So, he has a lot of experience with moving in those different realms without being unproductive, so to speak, and so it was very natural. Like the first time we spent together was just hanging out, talking about the script. And he's a very nice man, very collaborative. So, and neither of us were pushovers. When we had ideas we felt strongly about, we batted them back and forth, and you get a rapport going, and then it just becomes, hey, let's get this script in shape. And then boom, the shoot starts. And a set is not a democracy. It needs a director, just the same way a ship needs a captain. In fact, it's a pretty great metaphor when you think about it. No one would question that a director needs a crew and collaborative support, right? In the same way, no one would question that a captain, he needs his sonar man. He doesn't know anything about sonar, right? He's not going to tell the sonar man how to do his job. He's got other things to worry about. And it's kind of the same as a filmmaker. You've got a crew, and you've got to count on their own contributions and their own skills, what they can bring to the big picture. But at the same time, if you don't have a captain, you don't have a battle plan, you've lost before you've even started fighting. And the same goes for filmmaking. So when we got to the set, Tom turned into an actor. He hired me, and he was my boss. And then we got to the set, and I was his director, and I was his boss. Then we got into post-production, and he was my boss again, right? And it's like, but he's really good at, he knows how to perform in each of these sections.
So tell us a little bit about the launch with Apple, because that's been sort of a big, in the news, and here we are with this big war film that we're seeing live from our homes in the middle of the summer. But I don't know too much about the distribution history, but tell us a little bit about that journey.
Oh yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We were scheduled to be in theaters June 13th, and there's even a trailer still online talking about, opening June 13th or the 12th or thereabouts. And then shortly after that trailer dropped, and even before Sony began the process of marketing, I think, for that release date, along came the pandemic. And like everyone else, everything got put on hold. And what's happening right now is that all the movies that aren't going into the theater are all bunching up like a crowd trying to get into the store on Thanksgiving, Black Friday, or whatever, right? Yeah. And eventually the doors are going to open. And to continue the metaphor, everyone's going to rush in. And then the first thing everyone's going to say is, don't stand next to each other, right? Mm-hmm. And so not only do you have this bottleneck building up. Every weekend we don't put a film out, the bottleneck gets fuller and fuller. But then if the doors finally open, we're going to be social distancing in theaters. And that means roughly half the capacity. So now we can only sell half the tickets and seat half the crowd, even when we get back, right? And when you combine those two ideas and you just sort of conceptualize what theaters might look and feel like down the road a ways, it's going to be a while before we're sitting shoulder to shoulder eating popcorn. And so that's what's on the studio's mind right now. It's like, so if we do, make it into the department store, and find a place to stand, you're going to have to leave them in the theaters longer, so that we can get the same number of people in front of the screen. And what's that do to everybody else, and how many movies really can come out
Right.
at the same time. We don't, you know. And so when Sony looked at this, they said, "Wow, we've got this this adult thriller drama, and that we think is going to play gangbusters, you know, against some other big Marvel movie or something, right? We've got a great alternative, but unless you know where all the other movies are going to land, it's hard to strategically place Greyhound so that you know it's found a good home and a good weekend. And with that uncertainty, I think that's where the decision was made. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could get this out to all the people kind of starving for something fresh and new? Mm-hmm. And that maybe in a way, there's an audience out there that's so hungry for movies that, you know, we could make sure Greyhound gets an audience. And so we were a little, of course, disappointed that we couldn't have a theatrical screening, because that's what we made it for, the big screen. On the other hand, this is the world we live in, and we're grateful to have an audience. Their audiences are a rare commodity these days.
Do you, I don't want to ask you to speculate too much on things that are completely out of your control, but is there a world in which when we're open back up and there is that bottleneck, but maybe, you know, because release dates have been sort of taken, you know, sequentially, that Greyhound does find a screen?
Well, yeah, I think I can't really, you know, it's
like, does Apple have any interest in
that's Apple's purview, obviously. But if I had to guess, I'd say, I mean, I doubt they're going to put it in a theater. You know, they're not going to, you know, they want to take advantage of the viewership and the interest to point audiences to their streaming channel. But I also think they respect the fact that it was meant for the theaters, and there might be a way that they could share it in the big, even if it's inside the industry. Who knows?
Yeah,
I can only speculate.
No, it's just a constantly interesting dynamic between, you know, streamers who are really releasing excellent content made, you know, for diverse audiences, for adult audiences, etc., and then the sort of classic filmmaker desire to have the big screen,
right?
So I'm sure that, you know, it would be fun to do this, you know, on the big screen in Norris if we get that chance.
Oh yeah, we'll come back if you want to put it up on the big screen in Norris.
You know, in 2021.
We'll come back.
So we're gonna take some questions from students, and as I mentioned before, what we'll do is I'll call on you individually, and I will invite you over as a panelist. Give it a second, and then you can turn on your camera if your camera ready, which, you know, those of you out there should be used to this now. So what I'll do is I'll start with one of our alums, Brando Benetton, and then we'll go to Zachary Kennedy. So let me just pull up Brando. All right, moving you over.
All right. So Aaron, congratulations. Truly, I was blown away by the movie. And I think that, you know, one of the risks generally, it blows my mind to hear, correct me if I'm wrong, but Shelley Johnson, the cinematographer, was talking about the fact that you guys shot pretty much just on a stage. And I think not only that is a credit to the visual effects company that followed you, it could have been so hard, you know, so easy to make this kind of cheap looking. And I wonder what your experiences, how your experience as a cinematographer informed your dialogue with Shelley Johnson, who does an amazing job, I think, layering the visual with color. You know, there's always a great balance between the light coming from outside and inside. Yeah. And what were the conversations in pre-production with, again, your producers, understanding we're gonna go on a stage, but we also know that's gonna be the right approach to shooting this entire thing, and it's not gonna bite us in the butt at the end of it?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. I think I can answer your question by saying that, again, it always goes back to the script. the script tells you what you need to do and what you need to point the camera at. My mentor, Conrad Hall, used to have a saying: if you ever kind of don't know what the hell you're doing and how to shoot a scene, always remember, point the camera at the story, which seems kind of, glib maybe, but it's true. It's like very simple. It's like, you can point the camera anywhere, but you got to start somewhere. And the best way to start is like, what is the script telling you is what's going to be most compelling to the audience in this moment, in this scene? Where does the scene live? Is it in the radar screen? Is it out over this, is it out there? Is it the U-boat? Is it the fact that I got a big empty sea and I don't know what's out there and that's scary? Or is it here, seeing the doubt and worry in the captain's eyes, right? And so you don't really think about how to make it big or small or cool looking or not cool looking. Your first step is always to let the screenplay tell you what to shoot and what you need to see. And then the sets you build and the choices you make are just an extension of that, if that makes sense. And then you say, hey, for example, most of the story is going to live with him in this pilot house. This is where he works. How does that translate to production? That means we need a very workable set that can move and be shot quickly and can be lit photorealistically, so that when we combine it with photorealistic environments, they marry up. And so, boom, there's that, right? Now I've got the story. We can't tell a story about a cowboy on a horse or a captain on his steel destroyer if I don't have a horse. So now we say, hey, down in Louisiana, there's this museum ship. We wouldn't have to build it, right? It's there, it's in its World War II configuration. That could be a touchstone when it's time to tell the story about how we fire the guns. I don't cut to the K-guns firing and the depth charges falling off the back because they're cool looking, but they are. I cut to them because Krauss just ordered people to drop them, right? So that's taking you back to the whole idea of story. So when I cut to him, how am I going to do that? I can't build a destroyer. Well, okay, there's this World War II destroyer in Louisiana. It's in World War II condition. We can use that as a set, but that means we would have to match our set of the bridge in the pilot house to match the museum ship, so that we could sew the two together, split the production between the controllable set that's matched to the museum ship, and then maybe a week on the museum ship where we see guys rolling charges and right. And then all of a sudden the production starts to take shape. You're like, wow, I've got this set. I'm going to put 60% of the 70% of the work here. I'm going to be on the destroyer 20% of the time. Then I've got to head over, to a hotel lobby and create the scene between he and his girlfriend, before he takes off on his journey, and that's going to be a day of photography. And then inside of those three elements, Shelley and I team up and we go, what's the most interesting way we can, if it's time to tell the story of depth charges being rolled off the back, what's the most interesting and compelling way to do that? You go, oh, well, let's see the crank. And let's cut to the tail of the ship, and it all happens sort of organically. And as far as the lighting goes, it was all about reality. We didn't want Hollywood lighting. We wanted very natural skylight that emulated the weather. Shelley put together a syllabus, a manifesto that divided each of these watches into different times of day with different weather elements, different color temperatures, so that he could tweak them subtly and give, over the course of the film, a sense of changing time periods. Even though it's pretty much all overcast, there are little subtle differences that help us convey the sense of time and passage of time. We wanted it to be real, because we then also wanted the photography of the A unit, the plates that are going to then get extended with visual effects. the more photorealistic the stuff we gave the visual effects company was, the more tightly it bound them to extending our work in a photorealistic manner. See what I mean? If we start with reality and then say, here, turn this into a shot, and they pull it up on the computer and start imagining their work, then what we give them is since they're going to extend it, they're going to match it. The more truthful and ground in reality and weather that we could give them, the more they were forced to sort of carry on in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Congratulations again.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go to Zachary Kennedy, one of our alumni, and then we'll go to Alexander Chang, an incoming MFA production student.
Zachary.
Hello.
Hey, Zach.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Sure.
I just want to say the film is fantastic. It was a real thrill ride, and I really enjoyed watching it. And I want to echo the hope that we'll get to see it in the theater when this is all over, because that would be really, really fun. I wanted to ask about your transition you were talking about from cinematography into directing. And I was curious what role, if any, your representation played in either helping that happen or how you found your way to your representation, and what it was when meeting either with an agent or agency that made you feel like these are the right people for me to sign on with.
Good question. I got to remember, what percentage, Alex, of our audience is students, would you say?
Oh gosh, it's hard to tell on the fly.
It's safe to say 80%, kind of? Like,
it's probably a bit more even split between students and recent. I mean, I'd say that there's a decent amount of recent alumni in here.
Okay.
And some faculty as well.
All right. So I think I know what you're asking, Zach, but I'll say this. The way I was in engineering at Iowa State University, having a hell of a time because I didn't enjoy my major, mechanical engineering. And this is for the students out there that are still trying to put a career together and trying to imagine this nutty process that's going to somehow get them to where they want to go. And I'm sure if it's anything like me when I was a student, what you keep getting back from anyone who's finally gotten there where you want to be, they'll tell you that there is no way to get here. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step to getting where you want to go, which is maddening when you're young and you want to like get somewhere. But more on that later. So I was down in Florida on a family vacation, frustrated with mechanical engineering, and I had been reading Cinefex magazine, and I was interested in special effects. And I said, maybe I can use engineering to, mechanical engineering, mechanical effects, they share the same word. And Billy Crystal was on vacation at our resort, and my parents said, why don't you go over and talk to Billy Crystal, ask him how to get into special effects. And so I went over and I asked him, how do you get into special effects? I'm a student. I want any recommended film school, which at the time wasn't the well-known thing it is now. It was a real niche. And a little scary because, everyone wants to go to college and find a future. But film school is kind of like almost going to art school. And that's how I got into USC. And one of the things Billy said to me is he said, the great thing about film school is that you'll get exposed to all kinds of different jobs. Editors and directors, sometimes directors will edit and editors will direct and writers will try producing and producers will. And he said, that'll be good for you because you'll see where your talents lie and you'll find your passion. And for me, I got bit by the cinematography bug when I was at USC, that sort of hammers and nails of filmmaking. And that pushed me out of USC into shooting. And I came up through music videos and eventually TV and then features. And what you're asking about agents and the transition itself, I had a DP agent, of course, and they worked very hard to help me develop my cinematography career. But this was me changing the course of my career on my own. I said, you know what I want to do? I woke up one day and I said, I want to make my own films. And I know enough about this industry now to know that no one's going to believe I can do this unless I show them. So I think I need to take my entire life savings, put it in a bank account, adapt a short story, since I don't want to, I'm a first-time screenwriter, and I think I need the stability of a short story that I can see works, and I'll adapt a short story. That's why I turned to William Faulkner's Two Soldiers, and I'll go make this movie, and I'll pull in every favor and every, right, and I'll just make it as big an explosion as I can, and I'll see what happens. And of course, that's what led to Two Soldiers, and the film eventually went on. None of the film festivals wanted any part of it because it was too long. We got turned down by 20 of them, you know, and then all of a sudden Palm Springs International Short Film Festival said, we love your movie, you know, come down. And I said, wow, okay, finally someone's digging on the movie. We premiered it down there. We won a jury prize, which qualified us for the Academy Awards. We dropped that off 2 weeks later. And a month after that, we were nominated. And a month after that, we won, my producer and I. And it was all a big crapshoot. It was just me saying, I need to find a way to turn the Titanic in another direction. It wasn't an agent sitting down with me in a room saying, well, if this is what you really want in your career, here's an idea, right? And even though agents are invaluable in terms of their support and both professionally and personally, all you film students out there, you got to build your own path. You know, don't be shy. You have to come up with your own innovative ways. Don't ever turn to an agent for the answer to a crucial, you know, move. You know, if you've got to find it in yourself. One of the biggest dangers of being a young filmmaker is staying in one spot and waiting for something on the outside to show up that you can seize. It will never work that way. You've got to like say, you know, I've got an idea how I can make something happen. And you know what? Pursue it. If it doesn't work, say, screw that, let's try this. And you really have to guide your own steps forward in your career. And I'm not saying everyone should go out and spend their life savings on a short film. I'm just saying, if you want to be a screenwriter, write one, you know, write a script. If you want to direct, go make a short film. If you want to, you know what I mean? You got to be your own engine. Because I sensed your question was about how can an agent help you move through your career? And the answer to that is they can help, but they're not the engine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That and also just like how you felt you were with the right person when you got to that point.
The right agent?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's another long story. It's an instinct. It's like, do you feel, because before you know whether your agent's doing a good job, you have to know what doing a good job is, don't you? And unless you worked at an agency or have had 6 agents, how would you know what doing a good job as an agent is? So it's like anything else. How do you know if you're going to be a DP, how do you know what your lighting works? How do you know? Well, you do it. See how it turns out. If it works out, you do it again. And the same thing with the people you work with throughout your career. You put yourself into it and you see what you get out of it. And if it feels like it's not what you need, you go another direction.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You bet.
Okay, so we're going to go to Alexander Chang next, an incoming MFA production student. And then we'll go out to one of our writing alumni, Eliza Bell.
Elisa. I went to film school with Elisa.
Excellent. Okay, so I need to just quickly move Alexander over.
Elisa Bell is a very accomplished USC grad writer. She's in charge of when all the USC people get together for our Oscar parties, our Oscar viewing parties, Elisa is the one in charge of the $5 betting pool. And she's hardcore about it too.
All right, count me in. Just joking. Hi, thanks a lot for doing this, and I love the movie. I watched it earlier today. My question was, oh, I can't see it anymore, but can you think of any, and it's kind of a vague general question, so I apologize in advance, but can you think of any key hard lesson that you were thankful to be able to bypass because of your time as a cinematographer and kind of already being present on the set for so much of your career? And on the flip side of that, can you think of any hard lesson as a director that kind of caught you by surprise that you had no idea to anticipate, despite your lengthy cinematography career?
Yeah, I think being a cinematographer taught me how to manage a set. It teaches you how to engage with a crew and be productive as a manager, because you're a manager. You know, might think of a director as the executive at a company, and he's got a manager, and the manager takes some of those managerial duties off the executive's plate so the executive can think more inwardly. You know, so if a director is like the executive, you're trying to keep the big picture in mind. So when you move from shooting to directing and you become the guy keeping track of the big picture, it was helpful for me, at least, to understand how the rhythms of the heartbeat of a set moves and how long it takes for something to happen, so that when you have an idea, you can go, I know with confidence we can do this because somebody asked me to do it once before and I pulled it off. And so now I'm comfortable saying to the crew, let's do this because I think we can pull this off. I've done it before, we can do it again. And so, you know, you can push the envelope a little bit more because you know what's possible on a boots on the ground level. I think, and the toolbox is the same. You know, I didn't really bring anything to directing that I didn't already bring to shooting. At the end of the day, you're looking at the monitor and you're saying, does it feel right? Does it sound right? Does it look right? Does it feel truthful? Is this what the script is describing? And if not, what's getting in the way? You do that as a cinematographer. You're like, does this feel right? You know, does this camera movement feel right? Does it feel like so you're using the same toolbox that you used to have as a cinematographer. You're just applying it to the performance instead of the light or the environment or the camera movement. You're looking for truth. Is it working? Is it authentic? Are we creating the right puzzle piece to slot in here before we move on to the next one? And, but I think your other question was, is there anything as a director I learned that I wish I would have known as a cinematographer? Was that the other half?
Yeah, something that just caught you by surprise that you were like, I had no idea this was going on all those years that I was on a set or working closely with the director.
Oh. Yeah, I had no idea how much work was involved in getting to the next film, right? There's a whole world. As a cinematographer, you go to work, your job's over, you call your agent, let's get the next job. And when you think about it, a cinematographer only gets called when a movie is ready to be made. You may or may not get the job, but the movie is on its feet, it's financed, it's real, it's a real boy now, and they need a cinematographer. So when you get a call as a cinematographer, it's a chance to go to work. When you get a call as a filmmaker, producer, a director, you know, or even as a writer, there's no movie yet. The call is about bringing a movie into being. You know, you're the one who has to write it, create it, develop it, get a studio to make it, right? So there's a whole alternate job as director that lives off the film stages, right? Has nothing to do with filmmaking, which is about building a project and getting it to the point that you even have a film to make. And it's a lot of work. Directors don't just wait for the phone to ring. How would you like to shoot such and such? Now, of course, that happens. People do get calls for films that studios want to make. But even still, there's a lot of things that have to happen before it becomes a real boy. And that I think would surprise a lot of people, how much work there is in between the work.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the Pinocchio reference too. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's bring over Elisa. All right, Elisa, you should be on our side of things.
Can you see me? Oh, there I am. I look short.
There she is. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi there.
Well, you know I loved your movie.
Thank you.
But I wanted to know if it was easier to work with Tom Hanks, the writer, or Tom Hanks, the actor.
Oh, wow. Well, it wasn't so much one's easier and one's harder as it was there were two different dynamics. When you're working with Tom Hanks, the writer, as you would with any writer, the writer's got a vision for how to make a story work. And director's got to like make sure that story gets to the screen. And most of my conversations with Tom were about, I want to make sure what you're trying to do here can actually make it to the screen. You have an idea, and I see what your idea is, and I want to communicate it, but I'm not sure we have yet on the page what we need to communicate what I know you're trying to do here. And that's my responsibility, because as an old director of mine I used to work for as a DP said once, you can't thread a script through a projector. And so that's the yin and the yang. It's about, but because the spirit of the thing is like, I love what you've done here. It's just, we don't have it yet. I don't have the nuts and bolts, to make that idea happen. And so, it's about applying the visual language to the script, especially in a movie like this, where it doesn't live in, a lot of scripts, a lot of scripts are about human dynamics and human relationships, and it lives in the words and the performances. But in a script like this, it's about, do I understand how the radar works? If I don't see this happen, how will the audience know that this is what he asked? You know what I'm saying? It's a much more, the movie's all about acquainting you with how this ship works. So I had to give a destroyer lesson inside of a screenplay. So that's where I attacked it. But as far as the relationship goes, Tom held on very tightly to his vision as a screenwriter. And then my job was to make sure that that what he wanted to do could make it to the screen. That's not to say I didn't have ideas or add ideas, or there's a lot of things that in there that I thought, wouldn't it be cool if? And Tom said, yeah, that would be cool. There's a lot of that. But he's very disciplined about what he wants to do with a screenplay. Now, Tom, the actor, I wouldn't say he's undisciplined, but he's much more, he's sort of like classic. He's sort of more like classical when he's a screenwriter, and he's jazz when he's an actor. Right?
Yeah, that's good.
He takes a very structural and disciplined approach to his screenwriting, but he wants his performance. He said himself in interviews, I want to come in with 100 ideas, just brimming over with ideas. That's my job, is to bring ideas. And then the director is going to fit it into his vision or her vision for the movie. And he wants to be molded. He wants to be directed. He wants to know, hey, how'd that, did that work? It's really funny because you'll come in after take one and you say, hey, Tom, why don't you try this? Here's an idea. Why don't you try this? He'll go, watch this. watch this, right? And then you do it, and you say cut, and you hear him scream, "What was wrong with that?" You know, then you come back in and you go, "Well, why don't we try this? Watch this." So he's rocking and rolling, you know, and he's obviously learned over time that taking that kind of an attitude and trying things, you know, gets the best out of him. Not every actor works that way. Robert Duvall, for example, was more like classical than jazz. He came in, sat down at the piano, and all he needs is, you know, you to say go, and he starts playing. He's got it all. He's ready to perform. You know, he's got one performance prepared for you. That's you know, and he's not that interested in a lot of variation on it, because it's the performance he's brought in. That's what he sees.
That's interesting.
So we have time for maybe two more, and since there are a lot of questions coming in from people who know you, I thought I would just move this next person over and make it a surprise.
Oh, this ought to be good.
Uh-oh, who is it?
This is a little frightening. Oh, Doug Blush.
1, 2, 3. Hello, Mary.
Oh, no. Is Mary with you? I can't see you.
I don't know why our cameras. Oh, here we go. Hang on. 1, 2, 3. And hey.
Hello, Mary.
Oh, my God. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Mary.
Hello, Mary.
I have COVID hair, so I'm a little embarrassed. But I cannot wait to see your movie. I have not seen this one yet, but Aaron Schneider's career is like one of my favorite things. So
should we tell him? Should we tell him what you told me on the set of she and I did a short film years ago, and I was a bit of a Mad Hatter back then too. And I remember she pulled me aside one day and she looked at me and she said, "You're either going to be a brilliant filmmaker or a car salesman. I don't know which, but you're going to be one or the other." So thank God.
Can you sell me a Prius?
What's that?
Can you sell me a Prius?
Yeah, how's the dealership coming along?
Yeah, I've got an old Nissan 240X in the basement. I'll sell you.
Well, we're following your career, and we love you, Aaron.
It's good to see you guys.
Well, Mary, it's great to see you, Mary.
Do you have a question?
Oh.
So somebody asked the question that I wanted to ask, which was the transition from, because I've known you as a DP, but knowing you as a DP, you were directing on the side often, like you had ideas for that. So when you're DP, like when you are doing a film and you're shooting it, are you thinking, oh man, if I could only do that? But out of respect, you don't do that.
Right. Yeah, that was part of the decision in my career to move from shooting to directing, because I kept having these directorial instincts. And I'm like, one day I was like, why fight it? You know, just if your passion is in telling the story in a more direct way, then why don't you just go try to do it? And that was a big part of my transition. But you know, the first two things I did, my short and my first feature, I was using my camera operator from when I was a DP. So we already had like a total creative language that was, and so we both slid up a notch. Instead of DP camera operator, it was like director DP. So the conversations were the same, but we just, you know what I mean? So that was really natural. But then working with Shelley, you know, every DP is different. And of course, when I was DPing, I didn't like it when directors didn't let me engage in the creation of that. But you know, I preferred to be part of that process. And But then I worked for Mikkel Salman, who is an amazing DP. And I remember him saying, oh, I'm going to set up all the shots. You just light them. And I remember going, oh, that kind of sucks. But then I got into it and I admired his work so much that I was like, this is cool. Like, this gives me a whole new kind of freedom to concentrate on lighting, because I know Mikkel's creating such interesting coverage that,
right.
you know, and it was a different way of working once I let go of that part of lensing a show. And so point is, every relationship's different, how, you know, and you've got to make sure that you're in sync with, there are no expectations. Like, you know, when David Fincher or Jim Cameron hire a cinematographer, those cinematographers understand how much those directors engage with that part of the process. And it's, you know, it's understood. And, you know, and hopefully you have a conversation about how that's going to work. Other films, directors kind of just hand it off. So, you know, it was about finding a cinematographer who understood that I was a cinematographer and I'm going to have thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
But then also me finding someone whose work I respected so much, I didn't feel like I had to do it for him because what he was doing was so wonderful to begin with, right? So it's really about casting a cameraman more than it is about some sort of set of rules on how you work together.
Right, right. But I don't want to take up any more time because people have questions for you, but
Yes.
Do you miss shooting?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I would love to shoot and direct a film one day.
Yeah. Bye, Aaron.
Patricia
Bye,
said
Aaron.
hello.
Take care of yourself, baby girl.
All right, you too.
Thanks, Aaron.
For everyone out there wondering what the hell that was all about, that was a line from our student film, you know, 25 years ago.
Oh, fun.
Take care of yourself, baby girl.
All right, I've got one more. Let's bring over Mark DeQ.
Another USC peer.
Yes. Let's see.
And Aaron, good to see you, man.
What's up, Mark?
Hey, haven't seen you since we screened Two Soldiers at William Morris back then.
Oh, that's
And
right. You were working the projection. Look at you got. What do you got back there?
Yeah, that's a old 35 projectors, and I got my Simpty Leader shirt on. Just to say, Aaron was out there. Aaron was one of the first people at SC to really get into 35 and make the transition from 16 to 35. And I'm a big fan of Two Soldiers. I haven't seen Greyhound yet, but I love sub movies. Any movie with a sub, I'm up there in. So I got one sort of techno geek question and then one sort of more philosophical. So the techno one is, what kind of previs did you use for, as you described it, the three-dimensional chess game of moving ships around? Because there's a lot of tools out there, but there's also, you can even use little ship models.
Right. Good question. We didn't have the money the way a Marvel or a Star Wars movie had, where you could map out everything ahead of time with previs, break it down into shot lists, budget it, you know what I mean? It was a much more organic process. Storyboard, we did some previs, we did some storyboards, but the first thing we did is, you know, I talked about this battle. You had to have this awareness of what the virtual half of the movie was going to be in your head. Then you needed a way to get it out of your head onto the set, communicate it to the actors and to anyone else who needed to understand this virtual world that's playing out there that no one can see. So step one is the novel itself has all those bearings in it. And if you actually track the bearings and read the book, you can extrapolate a battle. The C.S. Forrester actually used real bearings to talk about really what the ships were doing. So you could use the book and come up with a general outline of what battle he was trying to describe by using the nautical commands. And of course, the description of what's going on in the book. And so we started by mapping those out on a circular navigation plot, you know, based on scene numbers. So we had these maps. And then we brought those maps into previs, into Maya for our previs team. We created our own little 4 or 5 man previs team. And step one was mapping out these battles in a bird's eye in real time. If it was going 20 knots, it went 20 knots. If it slowed to standard, it slowed to standard. If it turned right, you know, full rudder, we found out that it takes 2 minutes to do a 180, and we mapped that out too. So it was real time, real physics, real speed, so that when it came time to, like, even though a turn might take 2 minutes, a filmmaker's got to find a way to do that with 3 cuts. The same way a lap around a racetrack might take 90 seconds, but in a race car movie, it takes 10 seconds. And so starting with that physical reality and the map of the battle, I was able to mentally picture, because all I was shooting inside of that bird's eye map was this little steel box sitting in the middle of this destroyer in the middle of the Atlantic. That was what I'm going to go shoot on the set. But everything else out here that is eventually going to become a point of view or a visual effect or that's virtual. And so it was the template. Like all the actors would go stand around this iPad and I'd scrub through it and show them what's going on out there. And then I would transpose that into eye lines with LED lights, and we'd shoot it in pieces that were controllable. And then we'd define what we were doing, what everyone was experiencing, what everyone was looking at. And then we'd time it out, and the actors and Tom, they would create a virtual performance by taking that virtual battle on an iPad and transposing that into their performance in any given piece of the film we were shooting. And we just did it one shot at a time. And we knew that if we stuck to this bird's eye map and we had a reality we could always touch base with to answer any questions about eye lines and speeds, and right, that if we adhered to that, then by definition, when it came time to fill out the rest of the movie and what they were looking at, it would all fall into place and marry up because it was based in a real world plan.
Right, that's fascinating. So just a last thing, maybe if we got a second.
Mark, we're really
all right.
We want to bring in one other person.
Gotcha.
If it's a comment, that's great. If it's a question,
it was just about what did SC, the legacy of SC to your career. So, but we've heard enough.
Yeah, no, I mean,
yeah, SC was a great introduction to Hollywood and to the way build friendships. I'm sure, as all the students out there know, you're building friendships and experiences that'll be with you all the way through your career and will support you and guide you, and friends become really important because it's hard to make a career in this business.
So thanks. Great to see you, Aaron. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, so I did actually have one more person I wanted to call on, Gail Katz.
Hey! Hey, ladies and gentlemen, you're about to meet a superstar producer.
I know I'm sort of
Gail!
didn't give you much warning.
What's up?
Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
Awesome.
You look terrific, by the way.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. This is my layout here, my Zoom office.
Hey, let me start by saying that story I told a little while ago about shooting for Mikhail.
Oh, yeah.
That was produced by Gail Katz, where Mikhail Solomon directed and I shot, remember?
Yep. Knew you were a great filmmaker from that, just the beginning there. So, Aaron, I do have a question. Where did my question go? Oh, it was up there a minute ago. But I was just going to say, like, when you signed on, or when Tom said you're the guy,
right?
Were you greenlit, or was it still a journey? Where did it fall apart, come together as they always do? As you said, making your boy or guy. I don't know. I always say the girl, but no.
Yeah, real boy.
Yeah, your little boy.
The Pinocchio metaphor.
When you, yeah, how was that?
Here's how it went. Starts as a screenplay, turns into, Aaron comes in, you build the team. It's Aaron and Tom and Gary and the folks at Playtone, who are fantastic. They got a whole infrastructure at Playtone. So now it's a Playtone movie without any money or without a home, right? So the next step in the process was, let's make this as an independent. Let's find a financier. And that's when Glenn Basner and Aaron Ryder from Film Nation came aboard and said, we think this is awesome. And it's a mid-budget indie, it's big enough to be a cool blockbuster, but it's small enough that Film Nation felt like we know how to do these movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we got Film Nation, and they want to go to the American film market the way independent films do. And they, it's just like it sounds for everyone out there listening. It's a market. People come up and just like their vegetable stands, they go, here's our movies for sale. And everyone looks around and says, I'll take one of those and one of these. And so Greyhound went to the American film market, and Film Nation started, piecemealing the budget together by selling it to various, or offering it to various foreign markets. And that's how you build your money. And then in the middle of all this, suddenly Sony appeared and said, we think this is terrific. We'll take it all. You don't have to sell to Spain. You don't have to sell to France and then find someone to finance domestically. We'll buy all your worldwide rights because we think this would make a terrific Sony film. So at which point we became an independent film financed by Sony. So it was the spirit of an indie with the sort of financial security of a studio parent, if that makes sense. And then of course that was what it was. And then Sony brought on some partners to co-finance eventually. And then as everyone knows by now, it was set for a theatrical release. And then the pandemic, we've talked about that already, moved us to Apple. And here we are.
So that sounds like a pretty smooth path, actually. Pretty
well. It was, except like any movie, we were this movie. I'm estimating because I would say it was like a 50. It's out there. They call it a $50 million movie, but that's gross. That's not really what they spent. So they might have spent 35 or 40. So we're making sort of an action adventure high seas movie along the lines of A Perfect Storm or In the Heart of the Sea or Master and Commander, but we're like low budget indie, right? So that was the challenge, is fitting that 100 million pounds of production into a 40 million pound bag was not easy.
It looked great. It sounded great. Luckily, I have a nice system. But the sound was amazing too.
We've got a big screen.
I really loved, and I do. Yeah, it would. Look, I'd love to have seen it in the on a really big screen, but I thought it looked great. Just one quick little production question.
And by the way, for those of you out there who aren't familiar with Gail Katz, she was a longtime partner with Wolfgang Peterson and made a bunch of big movies. And of course, her partner Wolfgang made the most classic U-boat movie ever, Das Boot, which sets up the expectations I have to deal with. So thanks for that.
Yes, I didn't do that.
But point being, anyone who hasn't seen Das Boot or any of Gail's movies should rush out and see them. They're terrific.
Thanks. So just a question, because you talked about the set that you built, the stage that you built on, that was in Louisiana, right?
On a stage, yeah.
On a stage. Were you in a tank as well?
No, all the water in the film. There's not a single drop of real water anywhere.
Oh, wow.
It might feel like a movie that has real water combined with some slightly photorealistic, questionable visual effects water, but that's what really is going on. Is it's really, really well done visual effects water up against other water that isn't quite as successful. But to the visual effects house's credit, if you felt like any of that was real water, it wasn't.
Wow. Well, great job. Great job. Impressive.
Thank you.
Congrats.
It's great to see you.
And you.
So before we sign off, I did want to just very quickly read a note from Mark Gray,
Hey.
one of your contemporaries, who said that he loved the movie and he forgives you for burning his lampshade in 1989.
That's awesome. I fell in love with, Mark was one of those USC students I came up with. And I would go over to his house and I would covet this gorgeous cylindrical lampshade that had the most gorgeous orange kind of light. It was like I was obsessed with Vittorio Storaro at the time, who was into warm colors. Go, for all you film students out there, go watch The Last Emperor or Tucker if you're interested in the use of color in cinematography. And I was just obsessed with his lampshade. And so one day, his roommate and I went off to shoot a little short film, and I secretly stole it so that I could put a light through it and use it to light the set. But of course, halfway through the shoot, I look over and the movie light has melted Mark's lampshade. And so I was planning on sneaking it back so that he never knew. But of course, I was busted and had to buy him a new lampshade. So that's the story behind the lampshade.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for taking this evening to come and chat with us about your experiences. And thank you also to Apple for being supportive and putting this together with us, and hopefully at some point also helping us to throw this up in Norris when the time is right. Yeah, best of luck with the film, and
thank you.
Thank you so much. And
everybody hang in there. We'll get, it might feel like we're lost at sea, but land is on the horizon. We'll get there.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.